The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Imagine arriving at the Canadian border in hopes of settling here, only to soon find yourself in a provincial prison. Tonight we'll hear about a campaign to end that practice. We'll also get an update on life inside Ontario's correctional facilities as the Omicron variant makes hard time harder. First up, a glimpse at what it's like to cover occupied Ottawa from journalist Joanne Chianello. It's Wednesday, February 9th, and that's all ahead on the agenda. Ottawa is a city accustomed to protests and big gatherings on Parliament Hill, but what's currently happening there is unprecedented, as protesters calling themselves a freedom convoy have created encampments and are refusing to leave. Joanne Chianello is the city affairs analyst for CBC Ottawa, and she's been covering this story since it began nearly 2 weeks ago. She joins us now from the downtown core of the nation's capital. And Joanne, as always, great to see you again. How are you managing?
Thanks for having me. Weirdly, it's starting to seem normal to have all of these trucks downstairs, downtown, and I'm not sure that that's really a good sign.
I hear you. Well, almost 2 weeks in, how would you characterize the mood of the protesters today as opposed to when this started?
This started like 2 weekends ago, and it was sort of a party, jovial mood, right? And a lot of people thought, including police, including the city, that it was going to be a weekend affair, that maybe some diehards were going to stay, but that was going to be it. They were going to go. That is obviously not the case. Last time we heard there were 400 or so trucks in the downtown core spilling, diesel fumes, honking their horns until very recently. There was lots of reports of people in the neighborhood being harassed. And right now where we are is, I would say, at a tense standoff, trying to see what is going to happen next. Police have announced a huge increase in policing and security. They've asked for 1,800 people. I think both protesters are wondering when that police force is going to come in, what's going to happen. And as we're approaching another weekend here, weekend number 3, I think that the residents are thinking, are we going to be seeing yet again thousands more protesters come back into the city? So people are really wondering, what is the next step here?
How organized versus organic does it all seem right now?
The protesters are super organized. Last weekend I went to the camp. They call it the Coventry camp because it's you would appreciate this, Steve. It's the local baseball stadium owned by the city, and it's on Coventry Road. And the parking lot there had been used to park some of these vehicles on the first weekend. The idea being, let's take some of these trucks out of the downtown core, put them, at this parking lot. And then, they were going to be leaving Sunday night. But in fact, what they did was they quickly moved into sort of setting this camp up as a supply camp. There was fuel there. There's food, tents. They brought in some saunas to keep themselves warm. And the city has had trouble moving them out of there. In fact, it was only last Sunday night that there was a massive police raid there to actually remove some fuel. And so, I think people have been very surprised by how highly organized this protest was. There are truckers here. They've been here for almost 2 weeks. They're being fed. They're being given fuel. And there's, the ability for people to, the protesters to communicate with themselves, amongst themselves, I should say, has been quite impressive, actually, on a logistical scale, to be honest.
That police raid that you just referenced, how successful or not from a law enforcement point of view was it?
I was actually at it, actually. It's not something I usually do. I'm usually covering, City Hall and legislature. So it was there. And I think it did 2 things. One thing is, there's been a lot of criticism that police have not been enforcing the laws. People wanted to see more active policing. They will tell you they're just trying to keep things under control. And I should say, we haven't seen any riots here. We haven't seen any really serious injuries or deaths. That is not to say that crimes have not been committed and there hasn't been other problems. But on that scale, it has been a success. But people have said, look, where is the enforcement? And what you saw Sunday night at this baseball stadium parking lot was a very, very obvious use or a display, I would say, of police power. There are rows and rows and rows of police heavily armed in their riot gear coming in. Dozens of trucks came in, fire, ambulance. They came, they took a fuel tank away. And so that had also, so in a practical sense, the supply camp had lost their fuel that they were transporting to those to the protesters who were downtown. But I also think it also served to demoralize them a little bit as well. Now, they are regrouping the protesters, and they say they're still going to keep going. But it was actually one positive step forward, but it's certainly has not ended the protest by any means.
No, and having said that, we did see the Ontario Liberal leader the other day come out and say, it's enough already. We need to start seeing arrests. We need to start seeing tow trucks coming in and taking, simply taking vehicles away from their owners. Handing
Stephen
out.
Del Duke is actually in town today. He's the first leader actually to come in, and the first provincial leader to come and visit the protests. Yes.
He's not meeting the protesters, though, is he?
I'm not. I didn't see him, but I think he's meeting with residents. No, he's not here to negotiate. But I think he's here to reach out to the residents of Ottawa. It being an election year, as you know.
Indeed, and therefore, I mean, the residents have got to be at their wits' end by this point. I know the horns aren't honking as much now as they once did, but still, people can't get into businesses. They can't get into they can't leave their homes in many cases.
No, it's terrible.
Yeah, give us some more flavor of what's going on.
I just go back. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, because you were saying that, yes, Steve Del Duca has said it's time to tow trucks out and things like that. This is not it's not as if people have not thought of that. Of course, they have. It is not that easy. For example, I heard from the Ottawa city manager, they have lots of tow truck companies on retainer. The city does. They have all refused to go in to do this work. Not only is it logistically difficult if the driver doesn't want to how should I say it, cooperate. But it's also, we're having trouble finding companies that are willing to go in there, because either they don't want to upset big trucking companies who they get their money, their work from, or they're afraid, frankly. So it's not that simple. As well, we heard the protesters downtown, about a quarter of them have children with them. And so it's not something you want to go in all guns blazing, right? You want to make sure that people are not hurt when you do this. And it is getting smaller day by day, but of course people are losing their patience. A lot of people want it to end all at once. We also hear that, there's a new convoy of trucks maybe coming in this weekend. And this is the other thing people are braced for. The last 2 weekends, we've had sort of the weekend warrior types come in. Some of them have just been partiers. And, last weekend, you probably saw the pictures of bouncy castles on Wellington Street and barbecues. So part of it is sort of fun, but another part of it has sort of a menacing atmosphere. We've had Randy Hillier, who, of course, was the MPP who's been kicked out of the PC caucus here, telling people this is the hill to die on, don't go. And so, again, it seems to be heading in the right direction towards ending it, but it is not there yet. And people are worried about the next steps. The residents are worried about the next steps that protesters might make.
Well, no disrespect to Mr. Hillier, but he's hardly the highest profile politician or ex-politician to make hay with this. I mean, for goodness sakes, Donald Trump mentioned it the other day. This story's all over American cable television. What do people in Ottawa make of all of that?
Well, it's not great, right? I mean, we're usually thought of as boring. I mean, I think people would really, we'd love to be known again as the town that fun forgot, right? I mean, this is Ottawa is a capital that is known for, having a nice big Canada Day party. We never make the international news almost ever. And now I think we'd like to go back to that. It seems, and it's certainly also been seen as a catalyst for other protests. This is not something, again, that people are happy about. And also, it also brings up it has questions about how well Ottawa can be managed, right? And I think this is going to be a big story afterwards. Already we're seeing calls for inquiries as to how was this allowed to get to this stage, this kind of protest? But now people are worried that we're seen as someone who cannot manage our own security, and that's not a great thing.
Joanne, maybe just one more comment on Prime Minister Trudeau. We noticed that he took part in that emergency debate that took place in Parliament the other day. He's between a rock and a hard place in some respects. He's not going to go meet the protesters. Some people want him to meet the protesters, but obviously that's not about to happen. Is there anything that people think he ought to be doing right now vis-a-vis this demonstration that he hasn't done yet?
Well, everyone's an expert on how to end this demonstration. That's one of the things you realize when you start reporting things. But of course, there's two ends of the spectrum, right? One is send in the army, use all the national force you have. That's not going to happen, as you know. The laws around that are very specific. That you only use it in a national army in a national emergency if there's if there is rioting. And he has said, and I think rightly, that you want to be very careful when you are sending in Canadian Armed Forces against Canadians. On the other end of the spectrum, I think some people think that the Prime Minister could speak out more to some people. There are some people who are just here because they don't believe in this laws. They don't believe in the COVID restrictions. They're here to protest that, and that is something they are allowed to do. And I think that the Prime Minister maybe could have gone a little farther in saying, people who are looking to overthrow the government or trying to start fires in apartments or harassing residents. I'm not talking to you. But the rest of you who are there because you don't agree, I hear you. I'm your Prime Minister as well. Maybe you didn't vote for me. And we're going to have to try to figure out a way to talk to each other, because there is now a giant gap here. And I don't know how federal leaders are going to bridge that, provincial leaders too. But I think we have to, because there are a lot of people here who are obviously very upset, normal people who would never protest, who are here, who are not necessarily agitators. And I don't know if they feel listened to.
Joanne Chianello, CBC Ottawa. Always good of you to join us on our program, Joanne, and thanks so much for that update.
Thanks for having me.
Immigrants and refugees come to Canada looking for a new life, but some of them find that their first stop in the country is a detention facility. A joint campaign by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International hopes to stop that. With us to explain, in the nation's capital, Ketty Nivyabandi, Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada. And in the downtown core of the provincial capital, Samer Muscati, Associate Director of Disability Rights Division of Human Rights Watch. And we're delighted to welcome the two of you to our program tonight for an important conversation about something I suspect many people know very little about. So let's start, Ketty, with you if we can. Tell us what the Welcome to Canada campaign aims to achieve.
Thanks, Steve. Well, when you think about it, Canada is really known around the world as a welcoming country, welcoming to refugees. And the idea is that it's very welcoming to immigrants in general. So we wanted, and that's why the phrase, the catchphrase of our campaign is Welcome to Canada. We wanted to challenge that assertion and that belief with this absolutely appalling reality, which is what immigrants experience when they do come to Canada. The immigration detention system violates the human rights of those who come to this country seeking refuge and seeking safety, and it is absolutely reprehensible. And our campaign aims to spotlight it, make sure that Canadians are aware of it, and ultimately abolish it simply because it has no place in a human rights respecting country.
Samer, do I have this right, that this campaign is actually aimed at the provinces as opposed to the federal government?
That's right. So we're obviously still advocating with the federal government to end these practices, but at the same time, with the campaign, we're highlighting the complicity of provincial governments in this scheme by allowing detainees to be held in provincial facilities, and more than 70, in fact, across the country. And people really don't know about immigration detention, and know even less that this is happening in their backyards in provincial facilities across Canada.
Samer, let me just follow up on that word that you used, complicity. So you are saying, I guess, in essence, that you think the provinces and the feds are in on this together in a nefarious way. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. This is one of the challenges we have in immigration detention in Canada, is that people who are detained under immigration law are really stuck in the worst of two worlds, with no one accepting responsibility. On the one hand, we have the federal immigration authorities denying accountability for what happens in immigration detention centers and in provincial jails, because managing these prisons are within the authority of provincial correctional authorities. But at the same time, these provincial authorities deny accountability for what happens to immigration detainees, because the decision to detain is made by federal immigration authorities. So in the end, immigration detainees are abandoned and punished by two levels of government at enormous cost to their mental health, to their relationships, and to their families.
All right, Ketty, let's focus on one province in particular here, and that's actually British Columbia. Let's go out west. The Government of Canada and the Government of British Columbia recently announced something regarding immigration detention, and I wonder if you could bring us up to speed on what that's all about.
Indeed. So just as Samir was explaining, these detainees are detained in provincial jails, and British Columbia happens to be one of those provinces. So our campaign started really targeting the province of British Columbia. We've met with the British Columbia authorities and brought these realities to their attention and called for the end of that complicity that Samir was just pointing out. And we're very pleased that the British Columbia authorities have decided to review the agreement that they have with the federal government and with the CBSA. The announcement has been made formally. The review is set to happen by the spring, and we're really hoping that by the end of the review, what British Columbia will do is make the decision to cut ties with this practice and really set the tone for the other provinces across the country to follow suit and to disengage from this practice.
How long do they want to review this situation?
Well, we expect the end of the review by the end of the spring. We should have conclusions of that review, and we're very hopeful. And we call really on British Columbia authorities to disengage fully from that practice.
Okay, Samir, in which case that's BC. How about Ontario? When do you plan to bring the campaign here?
So we're on to Quebec right now and pushing the Quebec government to hopefully do a review and to cancel their contract as well. And we're hoping to be in Ontario after the provincial election is happening in June or around June. So once we have a new provincial government, expect us to be here advocating for this province to do the same.
I was going to say, you know, it's unlikely in the next 4 months that anybody's going to get any attention for anything that doesn't relate to re-electing the current government or putting another government in place. So that's why you're holding off for now. Is that right?
Exactly. Just because we want this issue to have the attention that it deserves. And with the new government, we hope that they'll have a new mandate to sort of take on this important issue.
Okay. Ketty just mentioned CBSA, the Canadian Border Service Agency, and we did reach out to them to get them involved in this program in the hopes that a representative would join us tonight. They declined, which is their right, but they did send us this statement, and I want to read you this statement, and then we'll pick this apart a little bit. The Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, has shared a long and collaborative relationship with the province, who house within their provincial correctional facilities persons detained under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, IRPA. The use of provincial correctional facilities for immigration detention is a measure of last resort that allows both the province and the CBSA to manage the fair treatment of detainees while ensuring the safety of Canadians when risks cannot be mitigated through other means such as alternatives to detention. And they also provided us with some numbers as well. This is as of January 27th this year. In provincial correctional facilities, there are 111 detainees, and in immigration holding centers, there are 101, for a total of 212. Samir, why don't you start off on this? You heard the conditions under which they say they implement this program with provincial correctional facilities. What's your reaction to that?
You know, it's disappointing. It's good, nice to see that the numbers have come down. You know, pre-pandemic, what we saw was almost 9,000 people are actually detained across the country in immigration holding centers and prisons. And the fact that the government has reduced the numbers to this extent shows that, you know, we don't need to have immigration detention. This is not being used as a last resort. The sky hasn't fallen. So I think we're at a crossroads right now where really there's an opportunity to continue with the gains that have been made in terms of seeing such a sharp reduction in detention. But our fear, of course, is that, you know, business will go back to business as usual. And in the coming months, once the pandemic sort of stops. So, you know, it's of great concern to us. This is at the end of the day an industry. You know, there's CBSA is receiving millions of dollars in the last federal budget. I think the federal government allotted $650 million over 5 years to CBSA. So, they're expanding their scope and their powers. And on the other hand, we have migrants and refugee claimants with few resources who are bearing the brunt of this very repressive regime. When we talk about immigration detention, we're not talking about people who are being held at the Hilton or at the Four Seasons. These are people who are being held in jails and correctional facilities, and oftentimes, with no end in sight. And the conditions they face are horrific. If you can imagine, we just had another death in custody of CBSA 11 days ago in Quebec at an immigration holding center. And, no information has been released. We don't know this person's name. We don't know this person's age, whether they had a family. These abuses are happening in the dark, and it's the only way that they can happen if CBSA, is able to do what they do. We need to dehumanize the people in detention for them to sort of, for them to be detained. So it's really, it's unfortunate that we have the statement from CBSA that sort of points again to safety and to risk, because that sort of really is not reflected by the numbers of why people are held in immigration detention. We have statistics that we indicate in our report from CBSA that indicates 93% of people are not held on safety grounds.
Well, let me just follow up with Katie on something here, because, our chart that we just put up showed 212, and then I just heard Samer say 9,000. So those numbers are not close together. Help us understand, Katie, what the story is there.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about the number of detainees per year. So cumulatively, we were looking at close to 9,000 by 2019 to 2020. And the number that we have, and we know that CBSA has released a large number of detainees throughout the pandemic. So these are the current actual numbers. I did want to add something to what Samir just mentioned, which
Please.
is really the fact that the vast majority, as he pointed out, do not represent a serious risk to the public. So the statement that was shared by CBSA is not accurate in that sense. We know that only about 1% of that number represents a serious risk. So there is no reason to detain these people under these circumstances. The other really important factor to keep in mind is that there is no length of time determined for these detentions. And Canada is actually one of the only global north countries which doesn't have a limited time for immigration detention. This means that these people could be held in those conditions indefinitely for years. And actually our report has pointed out that people of color in particular, racialized people and Black people in particular, tend to be held for much, much longer time. So there's several really problematic layers and really overarching layers of human rights violations that are occurring in the system and that need to be urgently overhauled.
Can you tell us, Katie, what a typical amount of time in these centers tends to be?
This varies. We do not know why and on what basis. This time lengths are set, and again, this goes back to the very important question of monitoring. CBSA is the only agency that does not have an independent civilian oversight to really monitor its mandate and the exercise of its powers, which makes it really difficult to hold it to account. And which really is the purpose of this campaign. And it's one of our core recommendations, actually, is that we establish an independent civilian oversight over the CBSA to look into these issues. But broader than that, what we're really calling for is to gradually abolish this practice. It has no room in a country like Canada, in a human rights abiding country. We really call for that to be overhauled fully, and we're hoping that it starts at the province level, and we're able to hold CBSA directly to account, and then we can gradually abolish this in Canada.
One more follow-up with you, Katie, because I'm trying to understand why anybody would need to be held to do what? What exactly do they need to be held for?
Often they're held and they're waiting for there's several steps, right, in the process. So they need to have a hearing, they need to have several processes in place. This can be delayed without known reasons, and so they end up being lost in the system in the process for that very long period of time. And they are often isolated. They are often, sometimes they are held in solitary confinement, or as we said earlier, in maximum security prisons without contact with family members or loved ones. Those are really cruel conditions. And you're right to ask yourself that question. There is no reason why they should be held in those centers. It does not make sense. I would urge us, rather than to try to make sense of it, actually call for that to change and to be repelled. The other aspect that I didn't mention is the fact that children as well have been detained as well. We know that up to 138 children were detained in the year 2019 to 2020, which is appalling, which has majority of them being between 6 and 17 years old.
Would they be separated from their parents, or are they allowed to stay with their parents?
Well, it's very unclear. We're not able to know that because the federal government doesn't track that data and doesn't make it available to us to review. And we also do not have access to these centers as well, which is one of the calls that we made. You need to know that Canada hasn't signed the optional protocol on torture that would enable organizations like ours and others to be visiting these centers. So this is a crucial point as well.
Okay. Samer, some basic facts I think we need to bring into this as well. Who makes the determination that somebody, be they an immigrant, a refugee, a permanent resident, whatever, who makes the determination that they need to go to a provincial correctional facility or an immigration holding center, whatever?
So this is the Canada Border Service Agency. CBSA makes that determination, and the initial determination to detain also falls with the CBSA officer, and it could be an officer who's just having a bad day that decides, you know what, this person poses a flight risk, or we can't identify their documents, so into detention you go. And once they're in detention, it's a very difficult process to navigate and to get out of, as Ketty was described.
And is there an appeal if you don't like that decision?
So every 30 days, in the process, people are supposed to have an immigration review hearing, detention review hearing, and at that point, people have an opportunity to sort of bring in new evidence. Oftentimes, it's very difficult, especially if people are awaiting documents from a war-torn country. It's very difficult to sort of try to retrieve those once you're in a detention facility. So
right. And do they have their own lawyers, or do they represent themselves, or how does that work?
Some of them have lawyers, and one sort of interesting feature of our immigration detention system is for people who have mental health conditions. It's actually quite alarming, because in those situations, they may not necessarily make decisions themselves. They're given what's called designated representatives, which in effect represent the detainee, has the power to make substitute decision making on behalf of the detainee, which again is a fundamental sort of contradiction of what the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities pushes for. So there's a lot of anomalies in the system that really sort of require us to examine it and to have a paradigm shift away from detention.
Sure. Let me get another distinction from you here. I think people watching or listening to this have a pretty good sense about what a provincial correctional facility is. Jail. I think we get jail. But an immigrant holding center, what does that look like?
So that looks like a jail. It's just if you have a plague, if you have some trees in the middle, people are still held in jail. It's we call them jail-like facilities. Essentially, they're locked up. Their movements are restricted. They can be held in solitary. They can't bring in cell phones. Their connection to the outside world is essentially severed, and they have to follow the routines and regulations of the holding center. They can't leave. So you can call it what you want, but it's still a jail at the end of the day.
Okay, and Ketty, how does an agent determine whether somebody ought to go to a provincial correctional facility or an immigration holding center?
Well, that's a determination that's made in unclear terms. There are formal arrangements with the provinces. There are also informal arrangements, which is really why our campaign has really focused on the province level. It depends on the capacity that CBSA has to hold these detainees in these immigration holding centers. But as Samir rightly pointed out, it also is a business in the sense that the provinces receive a certain amount of a fee for every detainee that they hold, and therefore it has become a lucrative business for a number of these provinces. But the decision remains quite arbitrary from our perspective. It's not clear, and what's important to keep in mind is that they're then detained in, as you said earlier, maximum security jails with other criminals, people convicted for criminal acts, when they simply came to this country looking for a safer life. You can imagine the trauma that this induces on these individuals. By the time that they eventually even come out of these detention centers and jails, they are broken. They're truly broken. The people that we've interviewed in the course of this report have shown deep long-lasting trauma, pain, and often even disabilities as well.
So can I just be clear about this? Are you saying that the provinces in effect are making money off of this system, and therefore they've kind of got a built-in conflict of interest if you're asking them to end it? Because if they're making money on it, why would they end it?
They should end it because it's a violation of human rights. It's as simple as that. They should end it because it's the wrong thing to do, and we're really hoping that by bringing this to their attention and having these conversations, that we make them reassess the reason why they've engaged in these processes in the first place.
Okay. Samer, tell me this. These are both congregate care settings, right? Provincial correctional institutions or immigration holding centers. They're congregate care settings, which means they have a much higher likelihood of somebody catching COVID-19 there than in the general population. I guess my question for you is, do you know whether COVID is a problem among this group of people?
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly why the authorities have released so many immigration detainees during the pandemic. And you showed the figures earlier. That explains why there's such a few number in these holding centers and detention centers now. But again, that sort of explains to us that clearly detention is not being used as a last resort. They've released hundreds, if not thousands of people, and the sky hasn't fallen. So we want to sort of build on that momentum now that COVID has presented this opportunity. There's been hunger strikes in these facilities with people sort of worried about their health, worried about their safety during COVID. It absolutely has been a concern for many of these detainees. And we hope that nobody has to go through what they have gone through.
In our remaining moments here, Ketty, let me get you to weigh in on whether you think there's a better alternative. If it can't be a provincial jail cell, if it can't be an immigration holding center, where's a better place for these people to wait while they have their cases adjudicated?
Mm-hmm. Well, building on what Samir just said, it's actually begun. We have seen a number of these detainees released because of the pandemic, and they have been brought out to the general public. There are alternatives. There are community-based alternatives that would support these detainees without having them spending the time in jail or being overly surveilled. It is important to work with communities who work on these issues, who support immigration detainees and immigrants in general, to work with them to design solutions that function and that are community-based. That really is what we're encouraging both the federal government and the provinces to do. These alternatives exist, and we must keep creating them and resourcing them to be able to do what needs to be done.
Samer, are there actually, families who would be happy to host some of these people while they wait for their cases to be rendered?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen how many people have stepped up to sort of support Syrian families when the call was made for people to come here. There's absolutely, as Katie mentioned, so many alternatives. And I believe if Canadians knew what is happening, they would be astonished and would step up to say this shouldn't happen in our name and step up to help these families. Ultimately, I think what we need is a paradigm shift to abolish the system. It's a defining feature of immigration detention is that it inflicts cruelty and it dehumanizes people on such a scale that it no longer feels cruel or dehumanizing. And I think that, the more that we shine a light on this and we take it out of the shadows, the more that Canadians will be appalled and will join us in calling for changes and supporting people so that they don't have to go through this horrible process.
Ketty, in my last 20 seconds here, I presume you've had a meeting with the minister responsible for all of this?
We have had meetings with provincial authorities. We have not met with the minister, the federal minister, yet. We have shared our reports, and we are awaiting their feedback. And we keep hoping that we'll be able to meet with them and bring this to their attention.
That's Ketty Nivyabandi, Amnesty International Canada, Samer Muscati, Associate Director, Disability Rights Division, Human Rights Watch. We're grateful to both of you for putting this on our radar screens tonight here on TVO. Many thanks.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Steve.
you. Thank you, Steve.
For people currently incarcerated in Ontario or who work in the prison system, this pandemic keeps presenting particular challenges. The highly contagious Omicron variant is just the latest. Lee Chapelle is president of the advocacy firm Canadian Prison Consulting, Inc. His clients keep him informed on what they're facing on the inside, so to speak. And so he joins us now from the provincial capital with more. Lee, it's good to see you again. How are you managing these days?
I'm well, Steve. Thank you. It's certainly an interesting time we're living in.
Ain't that the truth?
Well as well.
Ain't that the truth? Well, we've had you on this program a couple of times, well, several times in the past, a couple of times since COVID hit, and I guess I need an update from you off the top as to how much more complicated your world has become with the Omicron variant now in ascension.
Our jails, our prisons, and I'm remiss not to mention long-term healthcare facilities in the same breath, and hospitals, all congregate settings are faring really, really poorly. Really bad, brutal, inhumane conditions is what our prisoners are facing and also what our staff are facing at this time.
Tell me what you mean when you say brutal and inhumane. Well,
since pre-Christmas, there's been no visits. There's been minimal phone calls, lockdowns, constant lockdowns. They've become very dark, hateful places, and the stress levels are really there. COVID has impacted. Omicron has hit so many people, staff and inmate, that major outbreaks have been the norm for a month and a half now, and about 2 months.
And again, when you say dark and hateful, does that mean that the violence inside our institutions has upticked?
It has. And I'll give you an example. So we would have 4 or 5 day stretches of total lockdown. 2, 3 men in a cell, and women, I suppose. I don't work with women right now presently, but two to 3 men per cell, 4 to 5, 6 days without any out time, no access to a shower, no access to a phone call. And when the ranges were let out to do a shower and a phone call, they refused to go back in. They were very frustrated with believing that they were heading back in for another week without access to anything outside of the cell.
Now, when you say 3 men in a cell, I presume you mean 3 COVID negative men in a cell. They wouldn't put people, all 3 together in a cell if one of them had COVID, would they?
You know, Steve, one would think, I can say that the healthcare officials are doing everything they can in a congregate setting. But if we take the Toronto South Detention Center as an example, Central North, Central East, these are super jails that hold 1,300 inmates. And it's a real challenge to move people around, isolate. I mean, they don't have the same tools available, and that includes staff. Staff rates of COVID, which are not released publicly, have been really high. They've been low on staff, hence the lockdowns, but also transmissibility has been so high that I have clients, for example, that are confident that they've had COVID and they don't report it because they don't want to be isolated.
Well, let's pick this apart. We'll do prisoners first and then staff second. If you are an inmate in a provincial institution in Ontario and you test positive for COVID-19, what happens to you?
You are to be isolated. And isolated, I think, within a prison jail setting is far cry from what we have come to see as a norm out here, where we're able to actually do that, whether it be at home alone, whether it be breaking up the house into different components so that somebody living in the basement or whatever the case may be, they don't have the infrastructure to do that. For example, every newcomer to an Ontario provincial jail is quarantined upon arrival for 15 days, but they're on a range with all other new arrivals, and double bunked and separated from the rest of the institution. But nonetheless, that's not quarantine. They are congregately being quarantined.
So when you say isolated, they're not really isolated, is what you're saying?
No.
Okay, how about staff? If a prison official tests positive for COVID-19, what happens to them?
Well, we have two different circumstances. In Ontario provincial jails, I'll touch upon the federal system. The Correctional Service of Canada has had a hard line stance. Anybody who's unvaccinated is not on site. And I believe at this point, they're looking at potentially ending contracts and terminating employment. They're really taking a hardline stance. Ontario provincial corrections have not done that, but staff have fallen to this tracing protocol. There's been so many outbreaks and cases within our jails that inevitably almost every staff member at one point or another has received a call saying you have to stay home for 10 days. You were on a tracing, you were found to have been traced to a direct contact. They have different variables as to how long they spent around the person who they've determined they've traced them to. But I would say that often our jails are running provincially with less than 50% of our staff on site and the balance at home isolated.
Okay, a couple of follow-ups from that. Did I hear you correctly in saying that it is not an obligation for a prison official to be vaccinated and be in the prisons?
In the Ontario provincial system, correct.
Huh. They don't have to be vaccinated. Okay. And the second thing is, now we've heard lots of talk, obviously, among doctors, healthcare workers, nurses, etc., about the burnout happening there because they're just constantly, of course, dealing with COVID all the time. Are we seeing the same kind of burnout as we are with doctors,
Right.
nurses, hospital workers, etc., among prison staffers?
Yes, we are. No question about it. We're 2 years into this, and we're short staff. The lockdowns, which are no fault of frontline staff, again, they're running at a 50% or under capacity. So they do not have the power to overcome this. Lockdown statuses, it's caused considerable strain day in, day out, attending what is essentially a petri dish for COVID, and have become quite frustrated. The other part of that is the frustration from inmates and families, and protests, et cetera, are really starting to hit home too. I mean, this has become, the frontline correctional officers have absolutely been through the grind, and I would say synonymous with PSWs in long-term care homes and frontline staff in hospitals.
Well, okay, I got to understand this better because presumably these institutions work better when there's a 100% staffing complement there to work. If you're trying to run an institution with 50% or less of the staff,
Right.
How can you make it work properly?
Well, that's why we're at this point. And Omicron, obviously, with the transmissibility, I think has been the highest rate of transmissibility since COVID began. There's been waves, and each one of them have hit the jail and prison system quite hard, especially provincially. Federally are far more protected and higher vaccine rates. But again, the provincial system, low vaccine rates for inmates. It's indefensible in a congregate setting. And the impact is, I feel it. I go on site and I visit clients professionally, and it's behind glass. You're double masked. You're asked to put on, or you're obligated to put on goggles. There's a temperature check. There's all these very thorough measures put in place to visit somebody professionally, and that's behind glass. But within the institution, there's no ventilation. There's no ability to open windows. There's no fresh air. They're tight settings. And yes, staff members are taking the brunt. Correctional officers are taking the brunt of the frustrations from inmates and families due to the lockdown conditions that have been ongoing for months on end.
Well, let me turn your attention to something that happened at the Southwest Detention Center in Windsor. I gather a woman died there recently. What can you tell us about that?
Well, sadly, my understanding is this young woman did not have a criminal record, but did have mental health issues. From what I understood, it's schizophrenia and bipolar and other issues that she was battling mental health. From my understanding, the court had ordered a forensic mental health assessment. However, again, another congregate setting, the forensic mental health facility did not have beds, and actually related that to COVID and being understaffed and not having the bed available. So she was placed into the Windsor jail and passed away. I guess from what I've heard, it's a cardiac arrest. I don't understand, but I can certainly imagine she was really, really stressed and frustrated. And, again, this is synonymous with what everybody's facing within their jails.
Right. Lee, I want to circle back to the issue of vaccinations. And we had hoped, actually, to have somebody from the Solicitor General of Ontario's office with you on this program. The Solgen, as it's nicknamed. Solgen is in charge of the prisons in the province of Ontario. They opted not to take us up on our invitation, but they did send us this statement, and I want to read this and get your reaction to it. The Solicitor General office says, we have a dedicated supply of vaccine that is kept and stored at institutions so that facility healthcare staff can vaccinate newly admitted inmates and those already in custody on an ongoing basis and help increase uptake in the general population. It is important to note that COVID-19 vaccinations are voluntary, and newly admitted inmates may have already received their vaccination in the community prior to their admission to custody. Okay, there's a lot to sort of pick apart there, but why don't I just start with a general reaction from you?
It's factually true. COVID vaccinations are available, readily available, and actually at the very front end of this were. So I can attest to, I'm a sitting member on a committee for Ontario Healthcare within corrections, and the effort from the very top of Solgen and Healthcare for Corrections specifically has been a very aggressive agenda to get all inmates vaccinated. However, cooperation has been a real challenge.
So vaccine hesitancy is a thing among the prison population.
It is. I have a few clients who've refused. I know people out here who are. I would call it hesitation. I would call it fear. I would call it not so much anti-vaxxers, but certainly fearful and distrustful of the vaccination. And it's a real challenge. I have tried in my own right to encourage. I was not keen to get a vaccination at the front end of this myself, and I had to do a lot of homework, a lot of research, fact check to gain the comfort level to get vaccinated. And I did, and I'm now vaccinated 3 times over. And if another one comes, I'll be there to do it. I believe it's the best defense that we have collectively. And I've done a lot of homework on that. But I do understand that that demographic is a group of people who typically distrust the system to begin with. And They feel like it's been pushed really hard, and they're concerned about what may happen years down the road, whether there be side effects, etc. It's a real challenge.
Okay, let me pick up on another issue, which is, I guess a while ago there was a decision made that if an inmate is not really like a serious violent offender and might be okay in the general population of the province, they don't need to be behind bars at a time when congregate care settings it could mean a death sentence. How are the efforts going to decrease the inmate population in the province right now?
Well, that's the irony. I think that's a great thing, a great question that you pose. At the front end of this, we did a discussion, I recall, early in 2020. And there were efforts being made at that point to increase bails. Certainly, that was one thing. So to try to bring down pre-trial incarceration, it was effective. The numbers did drop. But we've lost, that emphasis has gone by the wayside. And I'm not necessarily being critical. I don't think of the decision makers in this instance. It's been very fluid. I think throughout this, we've been hoping always and believing that we're, coming up on light at the end of the tunnel, and that maybe the next wave is the last wave. And it's been fluid. So it's been, nobody had a crystal ball on this. But those efforts have gone by the wayside, and our populations are much higher now.
Well, once again, we reached out to the Ministry of the Solicitor General for a comment on what they're doing on reducing the number of inmates in our institutions, and here's what they had to say. They said correctional services and justice sector partners, those are the federal authorities, continue to, quote, grant temporary absences for all intermittent inmates who serve time on weekends, use an expanded temporary absence authority to allow for early release of inmates who are close to the end of their sentence and are not convicted of violent crimes and are at a low risk to reoffend, use virtual court appearances, and avoid non-essential inmate transfers between facilities. Okay, that's what they say they're doing. Again, your reaction to all of that?
I haven't seen it in practice, and I know when this first rolled out in 2020, I did a lot of homework. I was in touch with a lot of officials, decision makers. My understanding when it came to the TAP program that they reference, the process entailed when somebody was down to 60 days to their statutory release date, their mandatory release, the end of their sentence, there would be a review process that was undertaken. And at the end of it, it would result through a vetting process and through decision making in that person being released in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 days ahead of the day that they would have been out regardless. At that point, and this was a couple months in, there had been less than 10 people that were released in that regard. The virtual court appearances are, I don't know what to say about that. That's certainly not reducing incarceration. I think it shouldn't be on the list. It plays no role. And the fourth item, I don't have it in front of me now, but
transfer between facilities of non-essential inmates, non-essential transfers.
This is a real concern for inmates and for certainly people who are working within the institutions. The union for Soldier and OPSU have been outspoken about not wanting to transfer and move around because clearly COVID has just been, they shut down the Sudbury jail at one point. They shut down OCI, Vanier, and Brampton. Neither have reopened, as far as I'm aware. They've had massive outbreaks, and then they move people to other institutions. Obviously, the institution who is inheriting this is not thrilled, and the correctional officers who work there are not happy with that. The real issue is I have clients that are sentenced who have been in pretrial custody, sentenced to a term of provincial custody, and are remaining in detention centers on lockdown, unable to transfer to a correctional center where by definition there should be some resources and ability for rehabilitation. Those have been stopped. Transfers for people who are entering into custody provincially and then heading to the federal system are backlogged. So this is not helpful in my view.
Lee, I've got a minute left here, and I want to ask you a real hard question to finish off here, and that is this. Over the last couple of years, Well, I think it's fair to say people have pretty much had it with COVID-19 right now.
Yeah.
And they've been asked to care about a lot of different things, you know, performance of their governments, performance of their healthcare system, inability to see family members, inability to go out to various events, and so on. You represent people in our society that the general population probably cares about the least.
Yep.
So how would you encourage people watching or listening to this right now to actually care about the plight of inmates and or the staff who are, after all, in a part of the province that most people never see?
Right. Understood. It's easy to overlook, out of sight, out of mind. And you're right, the viewpoint on that, nobody really gives a damn. The view is those are very old people when it comes to long-term care, because I haven't seen a lot of empathy there either. Or those are very bad people, and it's got nothing to do with me when it comes to prisoners until it does. And when I say until it does, I work with many families who have first-time offenders and are appalled and shocked at what is happening with their loved one who is now incarcerated. But for the grace of God is an expression, and it can happen. And this does have an impact. Steve, I'd like to see technology be utilized in a far better way. We've been able to be very innovative in the world. We're doing this. I'm at home right now speaking with you. The show goes on, right? Businesses have become very innovative. Our jails may as well be in the 1800s at this point. We are just so far behind, and that impact, I believe, will result in higher recidivism, higher violence. It's not public safety, it's short-term containment, it's inhumane, and I don't believe it's a good investment, return on investment for Canadian monies being put into our correctional system.
Lee Chapelle, President, Canadian Prison Consulting, Inc. We always are grateful for your appearances on our program. You know so much about this system that the rest of us know so little about. So thanks for making time for us again on TVO tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Steve. Take care.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. Tomorrow, with food bank usage climbing, we'll try to get a handle on poverty in smaller and rural communities in this province. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.